all so much for joining us. The first question, I would love it. It's obviously you guys have incredible backgrounds, so it's really helpful to hear it in the first person. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the seat that you're in today.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Liza Rodewald. I am the CEO and co-founder of Instant Teams. And I'm also a military spouse, which I don't know was on my bio or not. So my husband's actually still active duty, so we're still living the lifestyle. We currently live in North Carolina, right outside what used to be Fort Bragg, now called Fort Liberty area. But I actually have a background in software engineering, and I ran my own software company before I became a military spouse. And so I had a completely remote company, and my husband was actually in the reserves at the time when we got married, so he's active duty, then in the reserves. And right after we got married, he said, you know, Liza, I think I want to go back active duty. And I was like, well, okay. I literally knew nothing about it, had no idea what I was getting into on that side. And then as soon as we got married and he went back active duty, we moved into our first military area. And every single spouse I met would say, Liza, how are you working? Like, what are you doing? How can you help me? And so I had this idea for the technology side of Instant Teams when I was running my own software company. And then when I met the military spouse community, I thought, you know, I think there's something special that I can do to pull these things together and really solve the unemployment issue for military spouses while also giving really amazing talent to companies that doesn't know exists. So Instant Teams was born in 2016, and we started iterating on that and putting military spouses to work in customer experience for large corporations, and we've been scaling ever since.
I'm Cynthia. Nonprofit side, I run a global nonprofit called Operation Code, and our mission is to help our transitioning service members, veterans, military family members enter their tech careers and continue to grow in their tech careers. So that is my nonprofit background. I spent the first 15 years as a licensed clinical social worker. I was married to active duty while I was a reservist. So, you know, we went through the difficulties of being a dual military couple with 2 different branches and raising 3 kids, often away from our families and friends. So I made the transition out of social work. There was this theme of being burnt out, which is why I do what I do today. And I actually joined Operation Code because I found that when I got out of the service, I did not have that social team. I didn't have a place of belonging. I was trying to figure out, well, where's home other than where I was born and raised, you know? And so trying to find my identity, career was going great, but I was lacking purpose. I was lacking that community. Found Operation Code accidentally. I was actually not intending to stay at Operation Code. I thought, I'll just come, you know, hang out, get some help on this piece of code I'm working on. I was living abroad, literally at the height of my career, running my digital modernization and digital media company. And, you know, there was something missing, right? There was this piece of me that said, why am I at the top of my game and I'm really feeling like I'm at the lowest point in my life? And when I joined Operation Code, the light turned on. It was like, wow, I've met a bunch of people that are also techies like me, that have really interesting backgrounds, that have served, or they're family members, and I stayed. And it basically, you know, the slogan of come for the code, stay for the community really became a mantra. And a lot of the folks that are there, it is like a big family. So we're not a coding provider, but we provide scholarships, one-to-one mentorship, paid apprenticeship to hire programs with partnering tech companies. And then on the flip side of it, we're not just training our military members, but we're training civilian allies. So we work with tech companies on the value of hiring military spouses, military family members. How do we do cultural competency training for hiring managers? Because just saying, hey, hire more underserved, you know, folks is not enough. Sometimes there's like a bias that people don't know about. So that's the nonprofit world, and then I have my for-profit. This is my second startup that I'm running. We're at the early stage pre-seed round. We've got some really great folks that are on board, and I'm really excited to grow.
Tough acts to follow. So my name's Manny. I'm the founder and CEO of Edvisorly. Edvisorly is a platform connecting students in community college with four-year universities to improve transfer success. Can I just ask a question? How many folks in here were enlisted? Okay, so oftentimes we kind of think of transfer as like this community college student that, you know, goes to a traditional community college, but it could be a student who goes to CCAF. It could be a student who has kind of a broad background. But a little bit about my background, the reason I started Edvisorly. I'm a first-generation college student. I had the opportunity to go to the U.S. Air Force Academy, but completely on a whim. My father was enlisted in the Army. My family has been enlisted generations back. My great-grandfather was in World War II. And for me, I knew I was going to join the military. I thought it was going to be in an enlisted capacity or go to work because we couldn't afford sending me to college. But I was offered a sports scholarship in my last 4 months of high school. So it was about the February timeframe. I became like a discovered athlete, and all the things kind of fell into place. There's another gentleman here at this conference. His name's Ryan Green. Oddly, he played defensive back on the exact same football team as me in high school. I played left corner, he played right corner, or I played right corner and he played left corner. So we both played football together. I was offered by Navy and Air Force. He ended up going to Naval Academy to play football, and I went to Air Force Academy. And we both got offered at the same time, around the same time. So perhaps this is also similar to Ryan's story. Fast forward, I had a great time at the Air Force Academy. It was very challenging, but I had the opportunity to run track and then went on active duty and developed technology for national defense. It was a dream come true for me to be able to build out some of the coolest satellite systems, new technology, have big budgets, and be able to deliver on capabilities for the country. I had the chance to go overseas and deploy and then come back, and it kind of shifted my perspective around access and opportunities. I was in a satellite systems office. We were developing satellite systems, and we started studying things like what's happening overseas for people that don't quite like our lifestyle and don't quite really enjoy the fact that we're adversaries. And I started hearing statistics like there's more people in the top 20% IQ in a specific country that's really populated that we can talk about, but I don't want to be ethnocentric. There's more people in the top 20% IQ in that country than we have people in our country. And then I started looking at the education system. I started looking at the engineers we did not have that we could not hire in order to be in these top secret positions. I looked at how hard it was to source human capital, people who would be committed to a mission. And I started to learn about this thing called community college, which is where most of my peers went. And the truth that only 12% of community college students who are freshmen and sophomores ever attain a bachelor's degree, when 80% want to. So for me, there was this natural concept of what's the best way that I can serve the country. So I went to Berkeley for grad school. Didn't want to join a company just to build Instagram filters, having my experience and background. So I founded Edvisorly as a platform to connect students in community college or students with credits with universities to help improve transfer success. And really as a focus on making sure that we continue to build on the foundation and fabric of what the United States stands for.
That's awesome. Would love to hear a little bit about how you guys got the companies off the ground in the earliest innings and some of the challenges that you faced. Liza, if we can start with you.
Sure. So it was interesting because I'm an active duty military spouse and trying to scale a company and wanting to raise money for it, right? So it's a very non-traditional founder in that regards. And so my co-founder and I actually, when we first started, we went to California and we pitched some people. Ryan is not in the room anymore, but Ryan Micheletti, who a lot of people know from the Founder Institute, Veteran Fund, and some other things. And one of the things we took away coming back is that, okay, we really want to build this company to scale. Like, I really want to scale this business. Like, I had 4 other companies before that were all more lifestyle, kind of bootstrapped, profitable companies. And I knew that to solve this problem, I needed to build a big company. And to do that, I was going to need to raise capital. And so I didn't know any investors. I didn't have any kind of network in that whatsoever. And so Ryan suggested I go through the Founder Institute, and so that I could start building a network. And so the accelerators and the things that you have access to, I think, are extremely valuable. And so I went through that program. And then as soon as I finished, I got out. It was in D.C. I did the D.C. program, and I was like, all right, I'm going to hit the trail, start raising money, and we got orders to Hawaii. And I was like, great, Hawaii sounds awesome, but how am I raising money from Hawaii, right? And I, again, reached out to more mentors, and I think that's really the key, like building a network and having those mentors. I reached out to another mentor that I knew, and he was like, look, this is the person you need to meet as soon as you go to Hawaii that unlocks that ecosystem for you. And I raised our first round from the Hawaii Angels there. And then a micro VC here in San Francisco, who I went and had lunch with yesterday, you know, because those relationships are what's important. So like getting the things off the ground, I think just building the network and doing things like this is how you kind of start to get things, to get momentum.
And then on the product and sales side, can you talk about like how you guys found your first customers and then recruited your first veteran spouses?
Sure. So we launched our MVP by just saying, hey, military spouses, do you guys want remote jobs and remote work? And they just like flooded the platform. So we knew we had that side of the market. On the customer side, we had to figure out, okay, I always came at it with, what is a business problem I can solve in the market and then give those jobs to the military spouse community? That's how I went out and did it. And so I went out, started working, finding customers for product market fit. And what I found was I had US citizens located globally in every time zone, so I could do 24/7 support for companies with an all US-based resource. And so that's when I found the product market fit of customer experience and to double down on that. And when I did that, I had an advantage for the enterprise, and that's who we sell to, like enterprise and mid-market, building those customer experience teams.
I'm still in the grind, obviously. You know, I'm digging in the trenches. My first startup, it was mainly like trial and error. We started as a professional services company, and won a lot of major government contracts for the digital modernization side. There was definitely kind of a tug of war between the content. You know, I'm a software designer by trade after I left the social work field and went into tech, and I noticed there was kind of like this gap of making data and platforms modernized, secure, and easy to use for users. And so we decided to move more in that direction. But really, it was just word of mouth. It's the connections. And what I come down to is it doesn't matter what your business is. It's relational. It's not just task-based. It's not just a transaction-based. It is really those connections, the people that you meet, the clients who might not be your client today, but maybe your client a year down the road, 5 years down the road. And so it was really a lot of people that believed in my idea more than me, I think, that completed the round and led to the acquisition.
Yeah, so in terms of getting started, one of the first things that I think for me that was really helpful is just remembering why I was doing things. So I think oftentimes when we start companies, it's really, really hard because you're balancing this concept of I need to make money and build a viable business model, but then I also need to have some purpose that's going to keep bringing me back again and again. That is, stronger than the world's will to defeat me in this vertical. And I think for me, like just being able to work with a team of people that actually, like not just myself, but build teams is a critical competency if we think about just really disrupting specific markets. I also think some of the kind of basic virtues of just like you kind of mentioned, relationships, making sure that we, at least specifically for me, follow up with like thank yous to people. Like sending an email to say thank you to someone, I think it goes a long way, and just really taking a lot of time to be intentional and deliberate has been something that's been really helpful. I also want to say one thing too, mentors. So doubling down on what you mentioned, mentors. So like Tonio here, he went to Naval Academy. Was in the Marines. He actually helped us tremendously through the seed funding round. We did raise funding, venture capital funding, and that can't, I don't know in any world how that could be done in a silo. Tonio helped us do a lot around bringing folks to the table, really introducing us to potential investors, making sure that we had like enough investors around us where we had that momentum behind the fundraise. So absolutely leaning into those in your community.
Everybody on the stage is building a social impact for-profit organization. Can you guys talk a little bit about the decision to build a for-profit organization versus taking something that obviously you're passionate about and considering doing a nonprofit with it? What was the reasoning or the rationale behind building a for-profit company?
I can talk a little bit about the for-profit and then why I'm also running a nonprofit. So two completely different business models, each have their own unique challenges. The for-profit side makes more sense for rebirth innovation because, we're trying to solve the problem of toxic cultures and burnout. And we're trying to scale that in a way that, like you go to your doctor, you get a regular physical once a year, you can see the exact issues that you have. There really isn't a solution out there that fits for companies. And so, when you're talking about employee retention, you're dealing with like DE&I challenges, you have unionization. There really isn't a model in the nonprofit space that fits that. And so it makes sense to go B2B SaaS for RI. And then on the nonprofit side, it's definitely more on how do we help make sure that vets not only get their first jobs in tech, but continue to grow. And so, your taxation laws, the way you set up your nonprofit, I feel like I'm much more under pressure with the nonprofit than I am in the for-profit. It's so clear our mission, what we're trying to do, getting people on board on the for-profit side, but on the nonprofit side, everything you do, every decision you make, every dollar that's spent is scrutinized. And not only that, but there is a fiduciary responsibility to your board members and then also to your donors. So, everything gets publicized, what programs you have, the statistics for those programs, how many donation dollars you made that year, how much you're paying your staff. So it's a little bit like you're under more of a microscope on the nonprofit side.
Yeah, I would say the same. So when we were building Edvisorly, we had to decide, number one, are we going to be venture-backed? If we're going to be venture-backed, they're not going to fund a nonprofit. But also, at what scale did we want to have impact? So we realized that it might be hard, and you have to do a lot of diligence to find a business model that's sustainable. But our business model, in and of itself, was focused on something that could make nationwide impact. And so we knew that there was this truth that there are students that are, in community college, or let's call them non-traditional, that they've been called for a long time, but millions of them. And the pathway to getting them to university also elevates net tuition revenue for the institution and helps them diversify. So there's a ton of economic value in terms of that exchange. We knew that we didn't want to make students pay for it because students, frankly, have more time than they have money. So we thought, okay, well, who would be our customers? It seems that universities would be our customers. And then being able to test that business model by getting our first set of contracts and getting institutions specifically that have a willingness to pay seemed like a clear pathway to scaling nationwide much faster than a nonprofit.
I think for me, probably two things. One is I've built businesses before, but I have no idea how to build a nonprofit. So it was just natural for me to say I'm building a business out of this versus go the nonprofit way. But the other thing is there's a lot of great nonprofits in our space that help military spouse employment and that are doing great things in there. And so from my perspective, how do I do this in a commerce way where I can generate jobs within organizations versus just try to connect people into the organization? So come at it from a different angle so that we can all kind of join together so the combination of that really does start to move the needle.
I would say, so the company that I run, the Military Veteran, which is very catchy branding, I know. And I do say that after every single time I say the name of the company. It's never been funny, but it's okay. I appreciate the chuckles. We made the same decision for pretty much the same reasons, which is there are 45,000 veteran-serving nonprofits that do amazing things for our community. But ultimately, we want veterans to see themselves, and we want companies to hire veterans because it's a good business decision, not because it's some sort of charity or philanthropic thing. And so I would say that really aligned with our core philosophy, and kind of obviously practicing what we preach as a for-profit, I think made a lot of sense. And then scaling nonprofits, I think, is also really tricky. Without a profit motive, I do think it is, it's just really tricky, I think. Cynthia, so you obviously built multiple for-profit businesses and a nonprofit. How do you integrate some of the lessons that you've learned from the nonprofit world into your businesses, and then vice versa? Any leadership lessons that kind of carry forward across the two types of entities?
Yeah, transparency is a big one. When you're in a nonprofit, everybody in the community is invested in the community. And early on, when Operation Code was very grassroots, it was started by an Army captain named David Molina, who was getting out of the Army, had already had his degree, had trouble using his GI Bill to get coding certifications and going to coding boot camp. And so it just started as a grassroots movement of these veterans trying to convince Congress to set aside funding for coding boot camps and professional certifications, which when you're in the tech field, you don't just get a CS degree and you're done. You're constantly learning, you're constantly training. And that's how we started. We started with advocacy work, and I think early in the days we were like, we're not going to be a coding boot camp. There's already other educational providers out there, and then that makes us competitive with them. We don't want to compete with them. We want to work with them. We want to have ethical guidelines. We want to set the bar on what they're asking of our veterans. We will also want to hold Congress responsible for a portion of the GI Bill that we got established called Vet Tech. So that was established in 2017, and then it's a pilot program that's ending. So that's the next thing that people are looking for. Folks are like, what kind of work are you doing on the Hill? Who are you talking to? How are you bettering the program? So that transparency is super, it's key, but you don't just have to like engage your members, you have to engage your sponsors and your donors and your partners, right? And your board members. And so that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of work. So that's where my passion is. It energizes me, the work I do there. But in the for-profit side, I almost feel like people get excited and they get involved, but there isn't that, your employees, yes, they want the transparency. They want to know, like, what are you doing to move the needle forward? What are our plans for the product? Not just the product, but culture. We talk a lot about scaling employee culture and changing cultures. We have to practice what we preach. So our employees are different than other employees where like you hire them, you pay them a wage, salary, and then you're just like, see you at the Christmas party. Bye, for another year or whatever it is. But for us, our employees are super engaged. Like they're here to make a difference. They could be at any other company, but they're here to make a difference and they want to know, why am I here? Like, can I make impact? And we go back to social impact that's on both sides, the nonprofit and the for-profit, are people that are involved want to be part of building a community. They want to be part of a bigger movement.
Have you guys found that having a social mission has been helpful in attracting great talent? Be curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, at first when we started Edvisorly, community college doesn't seem like the most sexy thing to go after. I couldn't actually build a team when I was at Berkeley because I was in this class of MBAs that all wanted to do whatever they wanted to do, work for big tech or work for the McKinsey, Bain, BCG. And so building a team was really, really hard with MBAs, right? They all think that doing that stuff is fancy. And so the pandemic hit and there were hiring freezes. All of the companies or startups that people were working on a lot of them became irrelevant. Community-based startups, there was no ability to meet people in person. And so Edvisorly began to start to take off because there were more online learners. Higher education was getting decimated in terms of enrollment. Community colleges lost 25% of their total enrollments. And so the steady stream of students just wasn't coming to universities, and it was killing them from millions of dollars in tuition revenue. So when I thought about it, we went from this company that we wanted to build a website to help students just navigate, and that's actually how it started, to hey, we need to actually make sure that this continues to persist because it is becoming something that students across the country really need access to. But we also still have to hire on an ethos of mission first, because if we start to dilute that, we're going to start to suffer both on the product side, on the revenue side, on the culture side. And I think it's just like any of our units in the military. You don't want people who want to be in specialized units because they watched a movie or a TV show about the Navy SEALs or the Blue Angels or being a fighter pilot. You want someone who's committed to the mission behind.
I was gonna say probably half of my class at Navy was there because of the movie Top Gun, but there you go.
Well, hopefully it didn't stay because of it, but go ahead.
I didn't.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Top Gun probably got me to go to a service academy as well. I watched it one too many times. But I think mission, everything has to be still mission driven. Even when you raise capital, as you grow, I think the mission is what keeps you on that common thread. And it helps to reinforce the hardest decisions you have to make, whether it's hiring or firing, moving the company in a specific direction, defending your board against why you shouldn't fire one of your teammates who's doing a great job. So, absolutely.
I think it helped us to attract some top talent that we might not have been able to get at an early stage just because people are drawn to the mission. And I think it also keeps people engaged and really wanting to see the success of the company. They're really bought into the company being successful because they want to see the mission keep going. And even today we have like our Slack channels, and we tell spouse stories in the Slack channels of the impact that they're having, because being in a startup and working, it's hard work, right? Like a lot of my team members put in a lot of hours, and they may not see the actual impact they're having. And so it's my job and our job as a team to keep putting that and iterating. You know, look at all these spouses that you're literally changing their lives by giving them these job opportunities and keeping that in the forefront to kind of fuel everybody through some of the hard things.
Can I ask you to actually just, if we can zoom out and talk about what veteran spouse employment rates look like in the United States? Can you tell us a little bit about like why the work that you do is so important?
Sure.
People that might be less familiar.
Yeah, so military spouses sit at 26% unemployment, and those are actively seeking jobs. So these are mostly women, 92% female, that kind of just get left behind because they move so often. And the average is every 2 to 3 years. But when I became a military spouse, I moved 6 times in 7 years. And so if I was trying to have a regular corporate job, I would have been left in the dust too. So it's a really, really huge issue.
Like tremendously talented human beings too.
Yes.
We've had a bunch of military spouse teammates, and they are rock stars. They're amazing. We actually just hired a military spouse who's starting in March, who I'm like really fired up about. Okay, these are the questions that I really want to ask because I'm like faced this challenge myself, and I wonder about it. So how do you guys weigh your social mission with a focus on growth, revenue, and profits? Like sometimes these things align really nicely and neatly, and other times it can feel as though they're in tension. How do you think about that tension? And if you have any examples that you can provide of times that they've been in tension and how you've approached those decisions that you've had to make, I would love to hear about them.
I think for me, we just recently made a big decision at RI to not scale up the tech side of the house so quickly, just because we are bootstrapped, and the fundraising scene has been difficult. And for us, it's not having investors that aren't interested. There are people that are interested, but it's being intentional, right, with your build. And we realize that the tech is a tool. It doesn't solve the problem that we're trying to solve for. It's really the relational. So, we're going to scale up the service side. We're going to continue with the consulting services and then utilize the profit from that to then build the tech side. And then with the roadmap with all of the clients, we can basically say we're doing the same thing for you, but we're scaling it up with the tech. There will be even more features available on the tech side. So, we always have a face, we always have the relationship first, and I think that's what drives what we do a little bit differently. For Operation Code, I still have to meet quarterly financial reports. We have paid staff members, most of them military spouses. We've had a lot of our staff members who actually became engineers, worked in tech, made the tech salary, and then after a few years came back to Operation Code. And they know we're a nonprofit. I can't pay them that tech salary, but going back to that social impact, they understand the mission, but they also understand that there's things that we need to get done. So I'll literally set up what do we need to have done, but also make sure that we're taking care of each other and we're having fun.
For me, I don't think we've ever had a profit mission issue, because the more spouses we put to work, the more money Insta teams make, so that kind of aligns really well from that perspective. But early on, and still sometimes, we've had investors and advisors that get upset about not upset, but challenge us a little bit about our branding and our messaging, because they're like, why aren't you red, white, and blue, and just super patriotic? And we're like, well, the military spouses want their own identity. So we've built the brand for them, not for their service member, right? This is their thing. And so we've had to fight back a little bit on how we do the empowerment of the military spouse community and how we want to communicate and be a brand to them, and not necessarily, the American flag everywhere in all the branding. So that's been an interesting just education, I think, on this sector to understand.
So I have this interesting kind of dynamic because we work with universities and higher education. So we've had a lot of kind of ethical conversations about, do you charge students? Could you charge students? Some investors will ask you, can you charge students? So just the kind of conflict between this like profit by all means and then thinking about the long-term vision of being able to build something that is sustaining has always just been really interesting, because the social impact side of it is sustaining. Folks that are in community college that are freshmen and sophomores should have a shot to become juniors and seniors. But the question is, do you sell out to for-profits? Do you sell out to, bill students because maybe some wealthier students and their families can afford it, and like they're in community college to save money on gen eds, and then you leave other students behind? So we've always had these like things come up, but I think just the team has always been behind the truth that, and a lot of our team is transfer students, so we actually hire based on that. If you were a community college transfer student, you're gonna get a blue star on your application. If you're qualified to do the job right next to someone who's not, you're gonna get the job. And so we really think about that and being intentional around that. And I think just balancing the ethos and the mission, and realizing that at the end of the day, this is a huge problem that the country hasn't really solved. So if we're patient enough, we'll build a really strong brand. And it's proven to be the best, just because the type and caliber of schools we can sign are significantly better than if we took the for-profit out early on and just made a bunch of money. We would not be able to sign schools like the one we signed today, like Portland State, or yesterday Sonoma State, or last week Rice University, or the week before Oklahoma State University.
I guess for me, the thing that I'm thinking about is like we've had to turn away companies that want to like advertise to folks that come to our in-person events, or like clients that want to pay us to help them hire someone, just because like we just don't think it's a good place for someone to land, which is painful. It's like super painful. And I was wondering if you guys had like similar stories of having turned people away, or just organizations that you were like, man, like want to close a sale, but just can't do it.
I have one. I don't even know if I should say it out loud. We had a company come to us, and it was a app for multiple partners, and they wanted to hire our military spouses to do this app. And I was like, do you know, this is a PR nightmare. Like, absolutely not. We cannot do that. And so we did have to
But we'll pay you a lot
around that.
There are like certain obvious benefits to building a social impact business, and I think the ones that come to mind are, obviously we've talked about hiring, we've talked about like PR, right? It can be beneficial for getting your name out there and helping to spread the word if you have people that are advocates or believe in what you're doing, the social mission part of it. Are there disadvantages to starting a business that has this social component of it versus just a straight up for-profit business?
Do you mind? Yeah, if you're raising a venture capital or venture-backed startup, it is extremely hard to find the people who are super aligned with you if you start with impact. And that doesn't mean that you can't have an impact, but one of the things I noticed while raising capital is if you start with impact, many VCs are really just going to close the door on you. And sometimes impact can be this, like, sometimes you can overplay on impact, when in reality, there's a lot of opportunity for profit as well, and that's okay too. In fact, it's really good. So I think that you're always in search of this like balance of the two. But kind of going back to it, like for us, I would say, yeah, like spot on, just that concept of like overplaying on impact. It'd be very hard to raise venture if you're over stressing impact and under stressing your business model.
There's nothing wrong with raising money and having a social impact at the same time. I don't think it needs to be a binary choice, whereas I think in most people's minds, it's like, oh, if you're doing something good, then it's a bit hand-wavy and you obviously don't have a strong business model. That's not necessarily the case. Like, if you want to talk business, we'll talk numbers, the traditional. And I think, like, it's how we tell our story. So I think folks that get attracted to us, whether it's clients or whether it's employees or people that are trying to get out of the military and looking for their next thing and saying, hey, I'm not ready yet, but I love what you're doing and I want to come on board. Where do I fit in? Like for us, we don't hire for a role, we hire for a career. So there are people that are software engineers that are like, oh, okay, I want to work more on the impact side, right? Like we want to work more on customer engagement. And it's really interesting to see people like jump from what their traditional role is. And then when you try to talk to investors and say like, look, we've got a high engagement rate, high utilization rate, like high success, high loyalty, that speaks volumes compared to like a regular SaaS model where You know, they may use it in their 1-year contract, cancel, come back when they feel like it. So I think the impact tells your story a little clearer, and it doesn't necessarily have to be either or.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like the storytelling piece was so important and took me a while to get right. So one of the things that I learned early on talking to investors was one, to lead with the numbers. Because if I led with the story, then they're like, oh, it's very nice, this nice little military spouse company that you're making. You know, I'm like, no, there's 12 million of active duty and veteran spouses. Like if I employ just a very fractional percent of them, I'm going to be one of the largest companies, right? So like just learning how to position it from a business angle, and then, you know, they get the impact. The other thing was leading with the numbers and the problem I'm solving, and the problem I'm solving from both sides. And I'd always start with the business side because every single company and investor understood that their customers struggled with great retention in their customer support roles, right? And when I say that, they're like, oh, our retention rates or attrition is like 8% compared to the 35% in the industry. They know I'm solving that business problem, right? And then here's the impact that I'm having with it. So I had to learn what order to put those things.
Yeah, it's kind of like sales 101, like craft your message for who's going to be receiving it, right? So if it's an investor, they just want to know, it's like, is this a good investment? First and foremost. Same thing about, we coach veterans who are looking for jobs when they're first getting out of the service to like, yes, people will be grateful for your service, but they're going to hire you if it's a good business decision. Like if you're going to add value and help make them make more money or take headaches off of their plate, that's why someone will pay you money. So I do think that was really good advice. Have any of you guys considered becoming a B Corp with your businesses, or where do you guys shake out on that? I don't know a ton about it, so if the answer is just like, nah, I haven't thought of it, then that's cool too. I'm just kind of curious.
I did look into it at one point, but it seems very difficult in structure. So that's as far as that got.
I looked into it. It seems like it was like not going to make a difference. I in fact went to my whole customer base and I was like, do you guys know what a B Corp is? And they kind of got confused because they were like, no, we know what a C Corp is and we know what a nonprofit is. Which one are you? And so for us, like if we became a B Corp, we thought it was going to insert like bureaucratic minutia and trying to explain why we decided to become a B Corp.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's actually helpful for moving the needle with customers. The thing that I think about is that it might be helpful, or there's probably ways to do this with a C Corp in like ingraining certain aspects of your culture in writing for if the business outlives you, right? Like these are things that are really important to us, that we work with the right types of clients, that we do right by our, military spouses or by our students, right, who maybe are not necessarily paying the bills, but we need this ingrained in the business so that when it turns over to the next generation, it is like something that they must look after. So it's something that I've been thinking about, and I was curious if you guys had thoughts on it. But
We have a code of ethics. So we like literally created a code of ethics and company principles, and we do everything by them. So, it's not just like a company that just has them on their website somewhere. We really use that to drive our decision making, because if I lose focus and I focus on the numbers and I'm focused on the money and I let my ego get in the way, somebody can remind me and go, let's go back to the code of ethics. Like, what did we agree upon a year ago, 5 years ago? And so I really don't want the company brand to be Cynthia. Like, I don't want my name synonymous with the company I'm building. I want it to outlive me. And it's the same with Operation Code. Like, a lot of people have heard about Operation Code or have been through a lot of our programs, received scholarships, gotten their first tech jobs through us. But they don't think of me. They don't think of my name. They think of, like, the community. They think of what we've done. They think of, the legacy we're leaving and what we're also trying to do in the next year. So, for the nonprofit side, we're highly engaged. It's mostly volunteer because we have such a small budget. But, when you have people that are mostly volunteer, you run into other challenges because they're not staff. So yes, you have to train them like staff. You provide, all of the resources for them. They're not paid. But at any point in time, they could be like, sorry, I gotta, go manage stuff. And that typically happens. So when a program's success is built upon the people, you got to make sure that continuity, the messaging, your code of ethics, what you want the company to be continues to be adopted throughout.
awesome. I don't want to hog the mic. I want to give you guys time to ask questions. So if you have any questions for these fantastic panelists, shoot a hand up and we'll put you in the game. Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question for you. Obviously, you said your customer is the university, and that's where you get paid. So, is there I guess I'm just thinking about community college students in transition, scholarships
No, it's not counter. It's actually great. Yeah, so we built the platform with the student in mind. Like, that's how we started. So absolutely, scholarship is really, really important. But when you look at just the success rates, or rather the opposite, which is the lack of success rates, there's a couple of things that happen with community college transfer students, particularly students that are transferring even credits. We could take veterans, for example. If they transfer credits to a university, there's a 43% on average credit loss, which is far worse than not awarding a scholarship, because now the student actually has to take a whole year of school all over again. So we work directly with universities on advising and building out technology infrastructure to allow them at scale to help students accept those credits more fluidly, and then show them what some of their competitors are doing, which creates what we kind of think of as like the law of one price. Like, if one institution takes it, the other institutions need to start taking it. It creates like a competitive landscape as well when we think about one institution offering scholarships, especially if it's a scholarship for veterans, veteran spouses, or if it's a scholarship for students through the Honor Society. It's been a high-performing student. We'll show them what we think of as like equilibrium pricing. We're essentially building like an Amazon-type experience for students to have a checkout procedure, but now their checkout procedure is getting enrolled at a university. So it's everything from discovering the institution all the way through application, understanding scholarships, credit transfer planning, building the relationship with the institution. So absolutely, scholarship is critically important, and we advocate for scholarships for our students. And we've been able to negotiate institutions increasing their scholarships and work with them on what we call the discounting model, which is they do price discrimination. How are we thinking about making sure transfer students are just told the price up front, because they're usually more mature students.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to use the mic. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Caitlin Lusk. I have my own Lusk Music LLC. Lucky as a military spouse as well. I guess my question is kind of twofold. When you guys were talking about that stigma, you've got like 26% that, you guys as veterans are also a super small minority, underutilized workforce. And obviously as military spouses, we're possibly even smaller in that percentage, even more further underutilized. I know in my line of work, for as long as possible, I think I kind of avoided that stigma of wanting to promote that element to my professional life. And I'm sure my question is, as when I started in the military, obviously, like I said, I'd already had my business. I had my LLC since I was 15, and my social impact was just through, as you said, like you meet other spouses, you're like, oh my God, they're like, how are you working? Like, how are you moving all the time and still able to further advance your career? So, and at the time, they'd also, my CAA, different scholarship programs, different government-funded support systems that are supposed to be there for that population that's already minute to begin with. My questions are two impacts. In your element to social impact, do you find any allies at all in that gap that is trying to increase, when you go to meet these military spouses, how many of them have actually heard of your company, advocating for them to hear about companies like you? Because, we have all these different government-funded scholarship programs for this population, but can't continue to further train that population. So how do you and your company do you see any advocacy or potential allies in that? And then my other question is, as somebody who's also transitioning to becoming a veteran military spouse and already established in their line of work, do you find yourself wanting in that publicity or in that proportion of having that experience something that is positive, or to continue trying to figure out how that is something that you can kind of advocate for? Because naturally, like I said, you guys are already creating social impact, but if you could further expand upon that as far as someone who's still inactive and somebody who's now out.
Well, for the first part of your question, I definitely see allies in the space for us. So one of the things that we don't focus on, but we know is a need, is what you said, the training, the education. Some spouses need to pivot in their careers to something that is a little bit more remote or portable, or getting one in the first place, right? Like, much like you and I, we were well established when we became military spouses, so it was a different experience. But so we partner with programs like IVMF that does the O2O program, right? And so whenever graduates come out of there, they send them to us and we reach out to them, and we do that all across the nonprofit space. So there's multiple partners and people that we work with. So I think the more we can bring those ecosystems together, the more impact we can all have together. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we're not trying to reinvent things that are already out there. We're just trying to plug them into our ecosystem and resources so we can move on that side. And then as far as the veteran spouses, that one's a really hard population. So we launched our app 12 million plus. That's for any kind of spouse, so active duty, non-active duty, veteran spouse. My co-founder is actually a veteran spouse now. Her husband just retired. And it's hard to reach that demographic because they don't identify themselves as veteran spouses, right? But they still have had that experience of struggle of maybe moving so many times and supporting the career. So that's something we've been working on. Like, how do we reach more veteran spouses that have kind of been left behind in the system? Because once you get out, those resources are not available for you anymore. A lot of the ones that you mentioned are only for active duty, right? So how do we get the word out that we're here to help veteran spouses as well as active duty spouses? And we're working on that. So if y'all all want to help me, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I can add to that too. At Operation Code, all of our scholarships and professional development programs are open to military spouses, whether they're active duty, reserve, National Guard, or veteran spouses. We have a demographic of spouses that have really struggled taking care of their full-time medical attendants of disabled veteran spouses. And we're working with Congress to actually pass a bill right now to make it so companies are incentivized to hire active duty military spouses and veteran spouses. It's called the Military Spouse Hiring Act, and basically it allows corporations a tax loophole where they'll get a tax break if they retain a certain number of military spouses. So we're trying to get that passed. I think it's already passed the Senate. It's trying to pass the House right now. So there are bills that we can push for to say, hey, how can we make it so that gap where military spouses aren't eligible for the GI Bill? Is there some other portion of funding that we can allot for additional training, right? Because when you have a disabled veteran, the spouse is the breadwinner. They're the one that's going to be making sure the family's together, taking care of all of their medical needs, and then out there working as well. And so that adds additional pressure. And I think talking to VA representatives and talking to them about the value of making sure that military spouses have ongoing education and ongoing work, incentivized work.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your work. We, like I said, really appreciate it. I know there's, as you said, there's so much unsung talent in that population. So for those in the service and those out, like I said, we appreciate all that you guys do. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Awesome. I have one closing question. I want to ask you guys, how can people find out more and support your businesses? What kind of connections are you looking for, and how can people be of service to you?
I think add me on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in the space, send me a message. I'd be more than happy to connect with you and collaborate. More specifically, we work with vice presidents of enrollment on the university side. If you know any presidents of universities, presidents of community colleges, folks that lead community colleges or networks or districts, they're usually very helpful in terms of making introductions. So anybody who has connections to leadership in higher education, or if you want to connect, if you're interested in connecting and learning more about Edvisorly, cultivating a relationship, if you think anybody might be a good Edvisorly team member in the future, I'd be very grateful. We're always looking for folks that are mission driven. So.
Yeah, for us at Operation Code, if you're trying to join, if you're a transitioning service member, don't know where you want to work, but you want to work in tech, join us on operationcode.org. If you want to reach out to me directly and you work in tech and you want to partner with us to hire more veterans, hire more military spouses, reach out at Cynthia at operationcode.org. And then if you're interested in helping, develop great cultures at work, I think one of the things I like to say is in tech, people think about product a lot. They don't always think about the people, right? And right now we're seeing that shift, an evolutionary shift of where people are saying, hey, how can my company stand out? Because we know we develop great products, but how can we also develop great cultures? Not just for employee retention, but to attract the right people. And to also, you want to love working there. You've got to be able to practice what you preach, which is, I have to do that every day too. So when I say, hey, how can I love waking up and going to work? I've got to create that culture, not just for myself, but for other people. So on the Rebirth Innovation side, reach out to me at Cynthia at rebirthinnovation.com.
Awesome. So I guess a couple of ways. One is if you are connected to companies or if you're a venture firm here that has portfolio companies, we do love to work in those ecosystems to help build the customer experience teams. We do everything from entry level all the way to software demos, sales support, very high level, anything customer facing, we can help build that team and help outsource it. So if you have any needs for that, you can contact me. It's just Liza@instantteams.com, Liza, so it's really easy. Add me on LinkedIn. If you know military spouses or veterans that are looking for jobs, we hire them all. And I'm specifically looking for a rock star salesperson to add to my team. So if there's anyone in sales here, or you know of anyone looking, I would love an intro there.
Oh, shamelessly, if you know any AI machine learning experts, please send them my way. We're hiring.
We're inspiring each other.
I love that. Awesome. Well, please join me in a round of applause for the panel.